I want to talk about one of my biggest points of dispute with the notion of man-made climate change. Man-made climate change has made as its model the notion of greenhouse gases as the only or the most significant contributing factor to changes in the environment around us. Now, assuming, of course, that they're talking about the climate as you and I think of when they say the climate and not the political climate, that is a argument from ignorance because it ignores other more significant and perhaps unacknowledged forces that exert an influence on the climate and the conditions of this planet. Far more important is the fact that this planet rotates itself and rotates around other objects. C.S. Lewis wrote about what he called the principle of undulation, which says that in any kind of cyclical pattern or revolutionary pattern, revolutionary pattern, that you will see repeated patterns and that there are also repeatable deviations from the center based on the nature of that revolution. So if you're looking at a two-dimensional change in an undulation pattern, those are things like day, night, youth, old age, spring versus fall, you will see that there are repeated patterns as we move from one extreme to the other. And that as you move into each extreme, you see a greater deviance from the center value. The same thing is seen with the Earth. As it rotates around, the biggest influence on our temperature is actually the fact that there's a day and a night. That during the day, the Earth is facing the sun, and that portion of the Earth absorbs that photovoltaic and radioactive energy and then rotates around, and during the night that energy is released to the side that has no source of energy sending it to it, so that what we're seeing then is a balance that the Earth is in the way of the total diffusion of energy from the sun to the rest of the universe, and that as we rotate we then refacilitate a exchange of energy from the Earth, which has absorbed it, to the universe, which has not yet picked it up from diffusion. And in this rotationary basis, you see there are other things going on that also play a role on the Earth's behavior and the movement of matter on its surface. Of course, man is there. But man is so far from the core of the Earth that the distance and the radians of our distribution from its center mean that we have almost no mathematically significant, at least on an individual basis, influence on what happens at the core of the Earth, which is where the rotation is decided. I've also been reading of late that there's a change in the Earth's rotation because of the core. That may actually be the biggest significant factor, at least locally, that is changing things on the planet. And if that is the case, if the Earth's core's rotation is what's changing this, then there's not a damn thing we can do about it in the first place. But we're ignoring other forces and focusing on the people on the surface. We're ignoring the core. We're ignoring the moon. We're ignoring the fact that there are other celestial bodies in our own solar system, including other planets, some of which are absorbing comets, satellites, and other bodies so that they don't collide with us and kill us all in an instant. There's the star at the center of our solar system that is also changing as it ages, like all things do. And then all the other solar systems in our galaxy that are revolving around the center of our universe. And that's just assuming that there's only one universe and it is ours. We have no idea where the center is. And the problem with this is we have no idea what the center value ought to be. We have arbitrarily decided what we think it ought to be based on our own personal preference. That is not scientific, it is subjective. For example, I have a neighbor who believes that it is ideal to keep their house at 74 Fahrenheit year-round. Well, there is no place on the planet that I know of anyway, where the temperature is 74 Fahrenheit year-round. Now, there are places where it's that more often than others, but there is no place where that's the rule all the time, in every year of all time. And even at the equatorial regions, where the amount of change from season to season is the least, the temperature of the equatorial regions is much higher than 74, which leads me to believe that if there is a central value for the planet as presently constituted, it is probably somewhere between the poles or between the pole and the equator, and not arbitrarily 74 degrees or whatever your local magistrate wants you to keep your thermostat at this summer. Because the other problem with the Earth is This presumes that the Earth rotates in a perfectly vertical axis, which it does not. It rotates around the sun and around itself, its own axis, at a slight canter. And the canter of the Earth is what precipitates our seasons, because the Earth not only doesn't rotate in a perfectly vertical manner, it doesn't revolve around the sun in a perfectly spherical rotational pattern either. It's more of an ellipsis, which means that we have places of apogee and perigee, which is to say that there are times when we are just slightly further from the sun and times when we are slightly closer to the sun than others. It is at these parts of the year when we are the furthest that we see more or less indistinguishable seasons. These are known as fall and spring, where there are deviations from the extremes because we're at the extreme distance from the sun, and therefore it has the lowest amount of determination on us because of the cant. As we rotate around the sun, if we are canted towards the sun, that becomes our summer, because that portion, and then winter for the other hemisphere, because that portion of the planet is the closest to the sun in its orbital pattern as well as in its cant as it rotates, and it spends the lowest amount of time pointed away from the sun to allow for the dissemination of energy back into the galaxy itself. So this is the real issue here, is that we have an arbitrary standard of what causes the warming that is not backed up by other scientific factors, and then we have a subjective definition of what the temperature ought to be that is not corroborated by any science. And these are only the ones I know about, because I'm a biochemist and this is really not my area of expertise. Who knows what other things there are that are far away from us in space and in time that are exerting an effect on our planet? To presume that man is the most significant contributor is simply because man is the only one that we can simply and easily access in order to make a change. If the sun is responsible, what are we supposed to do? If the core of the earth is responsible, what are we supposed to do? If the center of the universe is supposed to be supposedly responsible, what are we supposed to do about that? We can't even get out of our own solar system. The Voyager probes were launched in the 70s, and they just barely left, Voyager 1 left in like 2015. It's not like it's easy for us to find out what the forces are. And so rather than go after what they really are, they go after an easy answer, which is to say, you're to blame for this. We're off to blame, 'tis too much proved that with devotion's visage and pious action we do sugar o'er the devil himself. Or in modern English, rather than blaming the actual culprit, the actual devil, we make one out of you, because that's the only thing that we can change. It happens everywhere. It's a human thing. It's a normal reaction. Well, I don't know what happened in my relationship. He must have been a piece of crap. Or my boss just hates me because I have a beard. I don't know, whatever where we unjustly ascribe blame to people because they're the only thing that we understand and the only thing that we know we have power over. The ability to destroy a planet or to influence its climate is almost entirely out of our hands, and at least in these terms. We can probably, devastate the face of it if we use all of our WMDs all at once. But I really don't think that there's any way we can restore it, because what's happening is there are deviations from whatever the center value is, whether we're looking at a two-dimensional deviation or a three-dimensional deviation moving around in the universe, where there are so many things at play that the calculus required to calculate the actual effect and to calculate the actual significant effectors is probably beyond our comprehension. Even if we have discovered what it is, we still will not understand it. So to go back to this, the most significant factors that affect the Earth are not ours to control. And because the Earth is a scientific system, it has some sort of compensatory mechanism to move it back to what it believes the center ought to be, not what we believe the center ought to be. For this reason, you can see in the fossil record ice ages and periods of warming. And if you go back in the records and ask yourself, why the hell were Romans wearing skirts? It answers the question of, well, it must have been a lot warmer there. Even during Tudor times in England, there was a drought. Let us not pretend that this is the first time there's been droughts on the planet or temperatures that were far away from what we think is normal. Because I don't know what normal is, and neither do you. All I know is what I think it is or what I wish it were. Okay? Or what someone tells me it is. And that's where most of these climate scientists are wrong, is who Who is this that darkeneth counsels by words without knowledge? How did you arrive that this is what it ought to be at? Because there's no way in Hoboken that you could possibly have garnered enough data in your single miserable life in order to correctly, decidedly determine that for all people of all time everywhere. Besides, as we move through the universe, the forces on us will change. As the earth ages, the forces in it will change. As our sun ages, the forces it exerts will change. And so what is normal may also change. Maybe this is something that we shouldn't be messing with. Maybe this is something that if we mess with it, the earth will slap us upside the face and say, no, 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 no. I know what I'm doing. I've been alive a lot longer than you have, or at least around, if you don't want to anthropomorphize the earth. But that's part of what they've done, is that they've anthropomorphized some of this behavior and made it unjustly the realm and responsibility of man to correct something that man did not build in the first place. The earth was here long before any man walked on it, and the earth will probably survive us in some form or another. But humans are the only organism I know of on the planet that is foolish enough to think that, for number one, that they're responsible, number two, that they have any power to say in it whatsoever. Because volcanoes change the planet, earthquakes change the planet, floods change the planet, and even at the equator, equatorial regions, when the temperature reaches its zenith, it pulls more water out of the ocean than saturates the clouds, and then precipitation occurs in order to re-equilibrate the balance to normal in those regions. And so the monsoon seasons are there to compensate for the perturbations of the fact that that region is picking up energy and not disseminating it at the optimum rate in order for the earth to maintain what the earth wants it to be. And again, I apologize for anthropomorphizing the earth. I'm talking about it as a scientific system, that there's a system. If you're familiar with any of the laws of thermodynamics, Gibbs free energy, enthalpy, entropy, you've seen the equations and you know that any change to any of those has to create a change in one of the others. And in order to keep the balance in energy, it just changes from one form to another. And so if I move to change that energy, then it has to change in another way in order to absorb the perturbations and maintain balance. And maybe that's what we're seeing on the planet, is a shift in the Earth's behavior, so to speak, in what happens on the Earth in order to equilibrate for changes in the distribution of free energy on the planet. If you missed June of this year, you may not have heard about the solar flares that we had that changed the temperature here and sent most of the northern hemisphere, at least in the western hemisphere, into skyrocketing temperature territory that the likes of which we have not seen. There's nothing we can do about the solar flares. And the presumption that if I somehow pay enough taxes, the government will be able to stop the sun from burning too hot is not only asinine and ignorant, it is corrupt and a lie, and you should not buy into it. I will tell you the same thing I tell my students every semester. Do your own homework. It's always good advice. Do not rely on what other people tell you about what is going on, because I will be the first to admit I don't know everything about everything, and I can't think about everything in order to answer those questions. So when they are giving you the answers, they may be giving you an answer that is either based on the only information that they have, which means it's inaccurate, or they may be giving it to you the information that only the information they want you to hear, which means it is irrelevant. And everything that we do based on incomplete and inaccurate and irrelevant information leads to improper and worthless results. They won't be around to answer for that. They'll be retired if we're lucky, and they'll be dead if they're lucky, long before we have to deal with the repercussions of piss-poor management of scientific endeavor. Because let's not pretend that scientists have never been wrong. Go look up the Haber process and look up the man who created it. We talk about refrigeration. We do not talk about the WMDs he helped to build in World War I, because that's an inconvenient truth to the things that we want to talk about. There are lots of lies in science. There are lots of liars who are scientists. We are people too. I've made plenty of mistakes. And I will probably continue to make them. Hopefully the ones I make tomorrow are different from the ones I made yesterday. Otherwise, I'm the moron and I'm the deceiver. Anyway, go look up things for yourself. Ask other questions. I'm not afraid so much of a question that has no answers. I am afraid of an answer I'm not allowed to question. And those are the people you need to ignore. If I'm wrong, great. Celebrate that I was wrong. You will always remember that I was wrong. And you will be able to own it and own me, and rightly so. Make good decisions, collect good data, disseminate good results, and do good things to other people, whether you believe in God or not, because that's always the best call and always the best advice. Godspeed.